I'm Kristen, and until recently, I thought I had it all figured out. Tom and I had been married for 2 years, living in a beautiful apartment in a nice neighborhood. We both had good jobs. I worked at an advertising agency, and Tom headed sales at a sports nutrition company. Our plan was simple: save for a house, then start a family. We lived frugally, sharing one car. Every morning, Tom dropped me off at work before heading to his office. I'd make my own way home in the evenings. It wasn't always convenient, but we were determined. Then Tom's sister, Sarah, came to visit with her 2 kids. She was a single mom. Her husband had died in a car accident. Tom's parents, my in-laws, were super protective of her. They were always trying to make sure she didn't feel lonely, which is why they sent her to stay with us. When Sarah arrived, Tom was over the moon. "Isn't it great to have them here?" he said, helping with her bags. I nodded, trying to match his excitement. "Sure, it'll be nice to spend time together." At first, I thought Tom's attention to Sarah and her kids was sweet. He played with the children, listened to Sarah's problems, and bent over backward to make them comfortable. As the days passed, Tom's focus on Sarah intensified. He started demanding that I put her needs first, too. "Kristen, can you help Sarah with the kids' laundry?" Or, "Why don't you take Sarah shopping? She needs to relax." I was exhausted from work and now had to cater to Sarah's every whim. The breaking point came when Tom said, "Kristen, Sarah's going through a tough time. We need to make her stay as comfortable as possible. Can't you be more understanding?" I stared at him, disbelief washing over me. "Tom, I'm trying, but I'm tired too. I work all day, then come home to cook and clean for everyone. I need a break too." He frowned, clearly unhappy with my response. "Sarah's a single mom. She needs our support. You should be more sympathetic." As I watched Tom fuss over Sarah and her kids, a sinking feeling settled in my stomach. This wasn't just a visit anymore. Something had shifted, and I wasn't sure I was going to like where it was heading. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah showed no signs of leaving. I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. After long days at the ad agency, I'd come home to cook for everyone and clean up the mess. Tom's constant criticism was wearing me down. "Kristen, Sarah doesn't like spicy food. Can't you make something else?" Tom complained one evening. I bit my tongue, fighting back tears of frustration. "Tom, I'm doing my best. I'm tired too, you know. Sarah's with the kids all day. She's exhausted and has no time to cook," he shot back. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "I understand that, but—" "No buts, Kristen. We need to support her." I nodded silently, not wanting to start another argument. I got it. I really did. Sarah was going through a tough time, both mentally and physically. But I was tired of Tom's unfair reproaches. I couldn't wait for things to go back to normal. One evening, as I was scrubbing dishes after dinner, Tom dropped a bombshell. "Kristen, we need to talk," he said, leaning against the counter. I dried my hands, bracing myself. "What's up?" "Sarah's thinking of looking for a job here in the city," he said, a hint of excitement in his voice. I froze. "Oh? That's unexpected." "Yeah, isn't it great? But here's the thing," he continued, not noticing my discomfort. "I think you should quit your job and take care of the kids in the house." The dish I was holding slipped from my hands, clattering in the sink. "What? You can't be serious." Tom frowned. "Of course I am. Sarah needs to work, and someone needs to watch the kids." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Tom, I'm not quitting my job to take care of someone else's children. That's not fair." "Fair? What's not fair is expecting Sarah to manage everything on her own," he snapped. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Okay, let's think about this. Where is Sarah planning to live if she gets a job here?" Before Tom could answer, Sarah walked into the kitchen, a smile on her face. "Oh, didn't Tom tell you? I'll be living here, of course, with my amazing brother. He understands me, supports me. I couldn't ask for a better brother." I stared at Tom, my eyes demanding an explanation. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. "Look, Kristen, can we discuss this later?" he said quickly, avoiding eye contact. "No, Tom, we need to talk about this now," I insisted, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm not okay with this arrangement. We can't all live together. It's too cramped in this apartment for 5 people." Tom's face lit up, as if he'd just remembered something wonderful. "But honey, don't you see? This is perfect. We were planning to buy a house anyway. Now we have even more reason to do it sooner. There'll be plenty of space for everyone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Tom, that's not the point. We can't just—" But he cut me off mid-sentence, his attention already elsewhere. "Sorry, Kristen, we'll talk later. I promised the kids I'd play with them." And just like that, he was gone, leaving me standing in the kitchen, mouth agape, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. From that day on, everything changed. Tom stopped driving me to work, always with the same excuse. "Sorry, babe, I'm really busy this morning." I knew he was lying, but I couldn't prove it. So, I found myself commuting on my own, both morning and evening, adding extra stress to my already hectic days. One afternoon, I came home early from work, hoping to get a head start on dinner. Instead, I walked into chaos. Sarah was sprawled on the couch, eyes glued to some trashy reality show, while her kids ran wild. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "what's going on here?" She barely glanced up. "Oh, hi, Kristen. The kids were bored, so I let them play." I looked around in horror. The walls were covered in crayon scribbles. There were mysterious stains on the couch, and my beloved houseplants, the ones I'd nurtured for years, were knocked over, soil spilling across the floor. "This isn't playing, Sarah. This is destroying our home." I couldn't keep the frustration out of my voice. Sarah just shrugged, her eyes already back on the TV. "They're just kids, Kristen. Lighten up." I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. "Sarah, I thought you were looking for a job. Have you had any luck?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I've sent my resume everywhere, but nothing good has come up yet. They all want too much work for too little pay. I'm not desperate, you know." I bit my tongue, holding back the retort that threatened to spill out. Of course she wasn't desperate. She had a free ride here, with Tom and me footing the bill and doing all the work. That night, as Tom and I got ready for bed, I tried one more time to talk sense into him. "Tom, we need to set some ground rules. Sarah can't just let the kids run wild like that, and she needs to start contributing to the household chores." Tom sighed, looking exasperated. "Kristen, Sarah's going through a tough time. Can't you cut her some slack?" "Slack? Tom, I've been cutting her slack for weeks. Our home is being destroyed. I'm doing all the work, and you're acting like I'm the unreasonable one here." "Keep your voice down," Tom hissed. "You'll wake everyone up. Look, I know it's not ideal, but it's family. We have to stick together." As I lay in bed that night, listening to Tom's soft snores, I couldn't help but wonder, when did I stop being part of this family? And more importantly, how much longer could I keep living like this? As days turned into weeks, the situation at home only worsened. Tom seemed oblivious to the chaos his sister and her kids were creating. Whenever I tried to establish some order or ask the kids to clean up after themselves, Sarah would run to Tom with complaints. "Tom," I overheard her one evening, her voice dripping with fake concern, "I don't think Kristen likes the children. She's always yelling at them, forcing them to clean. They're just kids, you know?" I waited for Tom to defend me, to point out that basic tidiness wasn't child abuse. Instead, I heard him sigh heavily. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'll talk to her." That night, Tom confronted me in our bedroom. "Look at this place, Kristen. It's a mess. If you can't keep it clean with the kids here, maybe—" "Maybe what, Tom?" I challenged, already knowing where this was going. "Maybe you should consider quitting your job. If you were home full-time, you could keep the house in order without putting so much pressure on the kids." I laughed bitterly. "So now it's child labor to ask kids to clean up after themselves?" Tom, do you hear yourself? But he wasn't listening. He'd been pushing this agenda for weeks now, and I was exhausted from fighting it. You know what, Tom? Fine. You want me to quit? I quit. His eyes widened in surprise. Really? You mean it? I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. Yep, I'll call work tomorrow and tell them. Tom's face broke into a wide grin. He hugged me tightly, not noticing how stiff I was in his embrace. Oh, Kristen, this is great. You'll see, everything will be better now. The next day, I did call work, but not to quit. I spoke with my boss and explained that I needed to take a 3-month unpaid leave for family reasons. Thankfully, I'd recently trained an intern who could cover for me. My boss was understanding and approved my request. When I told Tom I'd quit, he beamed with pride, shooting a triumphant look at Sarah. See? I told you Kristen would come around. She understands the importance of family. As I watched them share their moment of victory, I felt like a stranger in my own home. But I reminded myself that this was temporary. 3 months. I'd given myself 3 months to see how this situation would play out, to see if Tom would realize the mistake he was making. The next morning, as Tom left for work, he kissed me on the cheek. Have a great day at home, honey. I know you'll do a fantastic job. I forced a smile, waving as he drove away. Then I turned to face the mess that awaited me inside. Sarah was already on the couch, TV remote in hand, while her kids ran around, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. From the day I quit my job, my life transformed into an endless cycle of chores and childcare. I'd wake up at dawn, prepare breakfast for everyone, pack Tom's lunch, and then spend the rest of the day cleaning, cooking, and looking after Sarah's kids. Meanwhile, Sarah lived like she was on a perpetual vacation. Days blurred together in a haze of domestic duties. Sarah would swan out of the house, off to shop or meet friends for coffee, leaving her children in my care without so much as a backward glance. I'd watch her drive away in Tom's car, while I was left stranded at home, juggling housework and childcare. Tom, for his part, seemed oblivious to the imbalance. He'd come home, kiss me on the cheek, and ask, "How was your day, honey?" As if I'd chosen this life, as if I was living my dream instead of his sister's. One evening, as I was serving dinner, a meal I'd spent hours preparing while Sarah napped, Tom made an announcement. "So, Sarah's birthday is coming up next month," he said, grinning. "I've got something special planned." Sarah clapped her hands excitedly. "Ooh, do tell!" Tom shook his head. "It's a surprise, but clear your schedule for the evening of the 15th. On the evening of Sarah's birthday, we all piled into Tom's car and headed to LeBlanc, the most expensive restaurant in town. It was the kind of place Tom and I used to dream about going for our anniversaries, but always decided the money would be better spent on our house fund. Tom's parents were already there when we arrived, cooing over Sarah and barely acknowledging my existence. As we settled into our seats, I couldn't help but feel like an outsider looking in on this family celebration. Throughout the meal, the conversation revolved around Sarah, her struggles, her strength, her dreams. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate, feeling increasingly invisible. After the main course, Tom stood up, gently tapping his glass for attention. "I'd like to make a toast to my incredible sister, Sarah. You've been through so much, and you handle it all with such grace. I'm in awe of your strength." Sarah beamed, soaking in the praise. Tom continued, "And to celebrate your birthday, I have a special surprise." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. For a split second, my heart leaped. Was this all an elaborate ruse? Was he actually going to surprise me with a gift to thank me for my sacrifices? But then he turned to Sarah and held out the box. "Sarah, you've mentioned how hard it is getting around with the kids. So..." He opened the box, revealing a set of car keys. "Happy birthday, sis! Your very own car, just like you've always wanted." The table erupted in applause and exclamations of delight. Sarah jumped up, hugging Tom tightly. "Oh my God, Tom! I can't believe it. You're the best brother ever." I sat there, frozen in shock. A car. He had bought her a car. My mind flashed back to all the times I had mentioned needing a second car, all the times Tom had said we couldn't afford it, that we needed to save for our house. "Tom," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "can I ask why you bought such an expensive gift for Sarah?" The table fell silent, all eyes turning to us. Tom's smile faltered slightly. "Well, Sarah needs a car. She has 2 kids, and it's hard for her to get them to the park or the doctor. Plus, she'll need it when she starts working soon." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "And what about me? I've been asking for a second car for months." Tom's expression hardened. "You're at home all day, Kristen. You don't need a car." The injustice of it all hit me like a physical blow. "How much did this car cost, Tom?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. $20,000. The room started to spin. $20,000? Where did you get that kind of money? Tom cleared his throat. "I took it from our joint account, but don't worry, I'll put it back as soon as I get my bonus at work." Something inside me snapped. "You took our savings without even discussing it with me? That was our house fund, Tom. I want you to return that money right now." "Kristen," Tom's mother gasped, "how can you be so selfish? Your sister-in-law needs this car." But I was beyond caring about their opinions. Years of frustration poured out of me. Selfish? I've given up everything for this family. My job, my dreams, my identity. Tom's face was red with anger. "If you're going to be so greedy and inflexible, fine. I'll take out a loan and put the money back in our account. Happy now?" "No!" I shouted, beyond caring about the scene we were causing. "I don't want you taking out a loan. I want you to sell the car and put our savings back where they belong." Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "See, Tom? I told you she was controlling. She's trying to make you henpecked." Tom's parents nodded in agreement. "Kristen," his father said sternly, "you need to learn your place. Tom is the head of the household." I felt like I was drowning, surrounded by people who didn't see me as a person, just an accessory to their perfect family narrative. Tom stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's enough, Kristen. You've ruined everyone's evening with your behavior. Don't you know how to act in public?" Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I stood up, grabbing my purse. "I'm leaving." "Good!" Tom shouted, no longer caring about the other restaurant patrons staring at us. "Get out!" "You ungrateful freeloader. I'm the one who earns the money in this family, and you should be obeying me. Maybe if you got a job, you'd have a right to an opinion." His words hit me like physical blows. I wanted to scream that I hadn't actually quit my job, that I was on leave, but the words stuck in my throat. What was the point? They'd already made up their minds about who I was. As I walked out of the restaurant, I could hear Tom continuing his tirade. "She lives off my hard work and then has the audacity to question my decisions. Can you believe it?" The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, tears finally spilling over. I had never felt so humiliated, so angry, so done. I arrived at our apartment, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The nanny looked up in surprise as I burst in, tear-stained and disheveled. I went to our bedroom and pulled out my suitcase. With mechanical movements, I began packing my clothes, toiletries, and a few precious mementos. I left a note for Tom, brief and to the point. "I'm staying at a hotel. Don't try to contact me." The hotel room was small and impersonal, but it felt like a sanctuary. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling the weight of expectations and disappointment crushing me. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the evening's events in my mind. By morning, I knew what I had to do. As soon as the law offices opened, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney. Sarah Garcia came highly recommended, known for her fair but firm approach. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, shaking my hand, "tell me what brings you here today." I poured out my story, the gradual erosion of my marriage, the financial betrayal, the public humiliation. Sarah listened attentively, taking notes. "Based on what you've told me," she said when I finished, "you have a strong case for divorce. Your husband's actions with the joint account are particularly concerning. Let's draft the initial paperwork." Over the next few days, I threw myself into creating a new life. I found a small apartment, not far from my office. I called my boss and explained the situation, asking to end my leave early. She was understanding and welcomed me back with open arms. As I settled into my new routine, I hoped for an amicable divorce. I wasn't out for revenge, I just wanted what was fair. I suggested mediation to Tom, thinking it would be the quickest and least painful way to end things. "I'm not asking for much," I told him during our first session. "Just return the money you spent on Sarah's car, and we'll split the remaining joint account 50-50. Tom scoffed. "Return the money? That car was a gift to my sister. You're being ridiculous." The mediator tried to intervene, but it was clear Tom wasn't budging. After 3 fruitless sessions, I realized we'd have to go to court. The next few months were a blur of legal meetings, paperwork, and court appearances. Tom fought me every step of the way, painting me as a gold digger trying to rob his poor sister of her much-needed vehicle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge made her ruling. The court finds that Mr. Johnson's use of joint funds to purchase a vehicle for his sister, without the consent of his spouse, was illegal. Mr. Johnson is ordered to reimburse Mrs. Johnson for half the value of the vehicle, as well as legal fees. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't about the money, it was about justice, about having my voice heard and my rights recognized. Tom's face was a mask of fury as we left the courthouse. "I hope you're happy," he spat. "You've gotten your pound of flesh, you greedy, petty woman." Over the next few weeks, Tom complied with the court order, transferring the money to my account. I later learned he'd had to take out a loan to cover it, but I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty. He'd made his choices, and now we both had to live with the consequences. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I had settled into a comfortable routine. My small apartment had become a haven, filled with peace and the simple joys I'd forgotten during my tumultuous marriage. I'd rekindled old friendships, thrown myself into my work, and even started a small herb garden on my balcony. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when I heard an unexpected knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I approached cautiously and peered through the peephole. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Tom standing there, looking disheveled and anxious. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door. "Kristen," Tom said, his voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He looked around my apartment, taking in the cozy, organized space. "You look good," he said softly. "The place looks nice." "Thanks," I replied, my guard up. "What brings you here, Tom?" He sank onto my couch, running his hands through his hair. I messed up, Kristen. I see that now. I came to apologize and, well, to ask for your help." I sat in the armchair across from him, waiting silently for him to continue. "I lost my job," he blurted out. "The company downsized, and I was let go. I'm still paying off the loan for Sarah's car, and I'm barely making ends meet. Sarah, she refuses to sell the car or get a job. Says she's not ready yet." A part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction at hearing this, but I pushed it aside. "I'm sorry to hear that, Tom, but I'm not sure how I can help." He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "The apartment is a disaster. Sarah doesn't clean, and the kids are out of control. The landlord's threatening to evict us because of the noise and mess. I realize now that you were right about everything. Sarah's not just going through a rough patch, she's taking advantage. And I let her." I sat there, taking in his words. The vindication I felt was bittersweet. Yes, I had been right. But at what cost? "Kristen," Tom continued, his voice breaking, "I know I don't deserve it, but I was hoping maybe we could start over." I've learned my lesson. I miss you, miss us. Maybe with your help, we could fix things. For a moment, I was transported back to the early days of our marriage. The love, the dreams we shared, the future we'd planned together. But then I remembered the betrayal, the humiliation, the months of feeling invisible and unvalued. I took a deep breath. Tom, I appreciate your apology, and I'm sorry you're going through a tough time. But I can't go back. His face fell. But Kristen, I've changed. I see things clearly now. I shook my head gently. The thing is, Tom, I've changed too. These past few months have shown me what I'm capable of, what I deserve. If you betrayed me once, who's to say you wouldn't do it again when things get tough? I wouldn't, he insisted. I've learned my lesson. Maybe you have, I conceded, but that doesn't change the fact that I'm happier now. I've found freedom in being on my own, in making my own choices without having to consider a partner who doesn't value my input. Tom's shoulders slumped. So that's it? There's no chance for us? I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I think it's best if you go, Tom. I truly hope things get better for you, but I'm not the solution to your problems. You need to stand on your own 2 feet and make your own choices. He nodded slowly, getting to his feet. At the door, he turned to me one last time. I really am sorry, Kristen, for everything. I know, I said softly. Goodbye, Tom. As I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it, letting out a long breath. A mix of emotions swirled within me. Sadness for the dreams we'd once shared, a touch of schadenfreude at Tom's comeuppance, but most of all, an overwhelming sense of relief and freedom.
This story is titled, My Stepbrother Stole His Own College Fund and Framed Me for It, Making My Entire Family Disown Me. What's up, guys? Let me share the drama that blew up my whole life. I didn't think I'd ever put this out there, but a friend of mine suggested posting here to see other perspective. So, here goes. My 26 male dad passed away when I was 10. It was rough. Just me and my mom left to figure things out. For those first couple of years, it was like we were in survival mode together. We were close, like best friends. She was my rock, my biggest supporter, and honestly, the only reason I got through losing my dad. Then my mom met that guy named Paul at some work conference, and it was like things went from 0 to 60 overnight. Within 6 months, they were married, and we had a whole new family dynamic. I wasn't thrilled about it, but Paul seemed okay at first. He was polite, kept his distance, and seemed to genuinely make my mom happy. Seeing her smile again after everything we'd been through felt like a good enough reason to give the guy a chance. Paul's son Eric was 10, same age as me, and when he moved in with us, my whole life flipped. From day one, it was clear Eric wasn't down with this new family setup. I get it. Having your parent remarry is a big deal. But Eric wasn't just adjusting. He acted like my mom and I were invaders in his life. It was subtle at first, but it didn't take long to realize this kid was trouble. Eric had this way of making himself look like the victim in every situation. He'd mess up the house and blame me, eat all the snacks I'd saved for later, and then lie about it with the straightest face you've ever seen. He broke a lamp playing tag inside the house and told Paul I'd pushed him. Another time, he ate the leftover birthday cake my mom had saved for me and swore he'd seen me eating it the night before. Every time, Paul believed him without question. To Paul, Eric was the golden boy who could do no wrong. What really pissed me off, though, was how Eric went out of his way to mess with my mom. He'd lie about stuff I supposedly said or did, trying to make her think I was some kind of bully. Alex yelled at me when you weren't home, he'd say. Or, Alex said he doesn't like living here anymore. It was all total BS, but Paul ate it up, and it started to wear on my mom. It reached a point where it started to drive a wedge between Paul and my mom. Every time Paul believed one of Eric's lies, it led to late-night arguments I could hear from my room. But my mom at first had always been my biggest defender, but after a while she started to second-guess herself. She didn't want to fight with Paul, so she'd just tell me to ignore Eric and let it go. Easy to say when you're not the one being blamed for everything. Things got worse as we got older. Eric leveled up from annoying little brother vibes to full-blown chaos. By middle school, he was the type of kid who'd skip class, trash his homework, and blame the teachers for his bad grades. In high school, he found a group of friends who were all about breaking rules and partying. They'd cut school, vandalize stuff, and throw house parties whenever their parents were out of town. And of course, Eric found a way to make me look like I was part of it. If he got caught doing something dumb, he'd say I was the one who started it. If a teacher called Paul about Eric skipping class, Eric would say, Alex skipped first, so I thought it was okay. I wasn't skipping anything. I was either in class or at work at my part-time job at a bookstore. But Paul didn't care about facts. He just wanted to keep his golden boy happy. He'd punish both of us, to be fair, even though I had nothing to do with it. By the time we were juniors in high school, I'd given up trying to clear my name. It didn't matter how much proof I had. Paul always found a way to spin it like I was the bad guy. You're just better at hiding what you do, he'd say. My mom would defend me sometimes, but Paul would shut her down with, you're just biased because he's your son. Over time, she started picking fewer battles, and I couldn't even blame her. The whole house was a war zone, and Paul and Eric had all the power. So I stayed out of their way. I focused on school, worked my part-time job, and spent as much time as I could at my best friend Jake's house. Jake was my safe space. He'd seen Eric's crap firsthand and was the only person who really understood what I was dealing with. That kid's gonna crash and burn one day, Jake used to say. I hoped he was right, but I didn't think I'd still be around to see it when it happened. Meanwhile, Eric's life was going off the rails. His grades were trash, and he barely graduated high school. He didn't get into any colleges, which pissed Paul off to no end. Not because Eric had screwed up, but because it made Paul look bad. Meanwhile, I got into a solid state school with a partial scholarship. I worked hard for that, and it felt like my one big win. But of course, Eric acted like it was a personal attack on him. You think you're so much better than me now, huh? He'd say whenever college came up. Must be nice to have everything handed to you. The audacity of this guy was unreal. I worked my ass off for that scholarship, while he had a literal $80,000 college fund sitting in the bank, untouched because he couldn't even get into a community college. By the time we were both out of high school, Eric had somehow managed to coast through life without facing any real consequences. It wasn't because he didn't screw up. He screwed up a lot, but whenever he got caught, he had a knack for twisting the story and making it seem like someone else was to blame. And 9 times out of 10, that someone else was me. Let me give you an example of Eric's genius-level manipulation. During his so-called gap year, which was really just an excuse to sit around playing video games and hanging out with his deadbeat friends, Eric decided he wanted to turn over a new leaf. At least, that's what he told Paul and his grandparents. He fed them some sob story about how he was finally ready to focus on his future and make them proud. It was a crock of shit, but they ate it up. Paul even gave him access to the office computer to start researching colleges and scholarships. Big mistake. A few months into his gap year, Paul noticed that the printer kept running out of paper and ink way faster than usual. When he asked Eric about it, Eric said he'd been printing out college applications and study guides. That should have been a red flag right there. Eric didn't even have the grades to apply to most colleges, let alone the ambition to study. But Paul believed him, as usual. With all these incidents piling up, the real trouble started 4 years ago. Let me break it down for you. Remember the $80,000 college fund I mentioned earlier? Eric's grandparents had set it up for him when he was born. That money was supposed to be his golden ticket to a brighter future. A huge opportunity just sitting there, waiting for him to do something meaningful. Except Eric wasn't exactly the make something of yourself type. He'd spent most of high school barely scraping by and didn't get accepted to any decent colleges. His grandparents weren't thrilled, but they decided to let him use the money for community college, with the understanding that if his grades were good, he could transfer to a 4-year school. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, Eric didn't think so. In his mind, the money wasn't an investment in his education. It was a blank check for him to live his best life. He'd been dipping into the fund during his gap year. Small amounts at first, just enough to cover new clothes, gadgets, and whatever else caught his eye. But as time went on, the withdrawals got bigger. By the time Paul noticed, the account was almost empty. This is where things get insane. Instead of owning up to it, Eric decided to shift the blame onto me. He told Paul that I'd been sneaking into his office, where he kept all the important documents, and that I'd stolen the account details to transfer the money to myself because I was jealous that he had a college fund. He even claimed to have seen me acting suspicious around the office on multiple occasions. Now, let me just say this. I didn't even know where Paul kept his office documents, let alone how to access Eric's college fund. I'd never touched that account, and I didn't need to. I had my own scholarship, a part-time job, and a clear plan for my future. Why would I risk everything to steal from a kid who barely passed high school? But Eric didn't stop there. He knew how to play the game. He created fake evidence, emails that looked like they came from me, asking about transferring large sums of money. He even planted a USB drive in my room with what he claimed were screenshots of the account and instructions on how to access it. It was the most elaborate setup I'd ever seen, and honestly, I have to give him credit. The guy went all in. When Paul confronted me, I was blindsided. He called me into the living room, where Eric was already sitting, looking all smug and self-righteous. My mom was there too, but she looked more confused than anything else. Paul didn't waste time. "Alex," he said, "I need to know why you did this." I had no idea what he was talking about. "Did what?" I asked, genuinely clueless. That's when Eric chimed in, all fake concern and dramatic pauses. "I didn't want to believe it, Alex," he said, like he was doing me a favor by pretending to be hurt. "But I saw you. I saw you going through Dad's office. And then the money started disappearing." Paul cut him off and started laying out the evidence. The fake emails, the planted USB drive, even screenshots of the supposed transaction. I was stunned. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion, knowing you couldn't do anything to stop it. I still remember this in detail. I tried to defend myself, desperate to make them see reason. "Check the bank records. Talk to the bank. File a police report. Do anything to prove I didn't do this. I don't even know how to access the account." But Eric had planned everything too well. The fake evidence was flawless, leaving no room for doubt, and Paul accepted it without hesitation. I turned to my mom, silently begging her to defend me, to step in and stop this madness. She just stood there, her face full of tears, looking at me like I was someone she didn't recognize. Finally, she spoke. "I'm so disappointed in you. I can't believe you would do something like this." Those words cut through me like a knife. "Mom, you know me," I said, trying to keep steady. "You know I didn't do this. You know I wouldn't." She didn't respond. She just shook her head, her eyes avoiding mine. Paul stepped forward, glaring at me. "This doesn't surprise me. You've always been jealous of Eric, haven't you? From the moment you came into this house, you've been nothing but trouble. And now, you think you can steal from us? From your own family? I've had enough." I tried to argue again, desperate for someone to listen, but Paul cut me off with a wave of his hand and yelled at me, "Pack your things. You're done here. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying in this house another second. You've got 30 minutes to leave. If you're not gone by then, I'll call the cops." I froze for a moment, looking back at my mom, hoping she'd say something, anything, but she just stood there, silent, her arms crossed tightly as if she was trying to hold herself together. Her silence hurt more than Paul's words ever could. Eric stood off to the side, looking like he was trying to appear upset. "I just can't believe you'd do this to me," he said, shaking his head like he was the victim. It was sickening. I almost stormed at him, smashing that fucking face, wiping that a smug smirk. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned and headed upstairs, my steps heavy as I went to pack. Throwing my things into a duffel bag, I felt a mix of anger, frustration, and heartbreak. This wasn't just about being kicked out. This was about my mom, the one person who was supposed to stand by me, choosing not to. She wasn't saying anything. She wasn't doing anything. She was just letting it happen. When I came back downstairs, Paul was standing by the front door, watching me like a guard, making sure I wouldn't try anything. My mom stood a few steps behind him, her face streaked with tears, but she still didn't say a word. I slung the bag over my shoulder, pausing for a moment as I looked at her, hoping she'd stop this somehow. She didn't. She just stood there, letting it all happen. As I stepped out the door, Eric muttered behind me, "I just can't believe he'd do this." That was it. No one was going to listen. No one was going to stand up for me. I realized then that I was completely on my own. I walked out of that house with a duffel bag, and nowhere to go. I felt like my entire life had been ripped out from under me. I was 22, had just finished college, and was suddenly homeless. My family, the people who were supposed to have my back, had turned on me because of a lie. I had nothing. No home, no support, and no idea what came next. The only thing I knew for sure was that I wasn't going to let Eric or Paul destroy me. Thank God for my best friend, Jake. The second I called him, he told me to come over. I don't know what I would have done without him. Jake had been my rock during all the years of dealing with Eric's crap, and now he was there to help me pick up the pieces. He didn't ask a lot of questions, just handed me a blanket and said, "Stay as long as you need." That first week was rough. I was still working part-time at a bookstore, but my hours barely covered food, let alone rent. I had some savings from my part-time jobs during college, but it wasn't much. Every night, I'd crash on Jake's couch and try not to think about how my own mom had let this happen. Every morning, I'd wake up, head to work, and pretend like everything was fine. But inside, I was a mess. But the worst part was that my mom didn't call. Not once. I tried reaching out a couple of times, but she didn't pick up. Not even once. It didn't take long to figure out that Paul had probably blocked my number. I kept telling myself she'd reach out eventually, but deep down, I started to accept that maybe she wouldn't. It hurt like hell, but I didn't have the luxury of wallowing. I had to figure out how to move forward. After about a month of sleeping on Jake's couch, I got lucky. My manager at the bookstore mentioned an opening for an entry-level IT job at her husband's company. It was steady work, and it paid better than the bookstore. I applied, and to my surprise, I got the job. That was the start of my climb. I took every opportunity to prove myself. I stayed late, volunteered for extra training, and soaked up as much knowledge as I could. It wasn't easy. I was balancing a new job, my lingering anger at my family, and the reality of being on my own for the first time. But I refused to let Eric's lies define me. After a couple of months, I saved up enough to rent a tiny studio apartment. I finally had a place where I felt like I could breathe. Jake helped me move in. And when we were done, he said, "See, you're already doing better than half the people I know." Having my own space made a huge difference. It gave me room to think and focus on my goals. In the meantime, I completely cut off contact with my family. I blocked Paul and Eric on social media and stopped trying to call my mom. It wasn't an easy decision, but I realized that holding on to hope was only dragging me down. If they wanted to believe Eric's lies, fine. I wasn't going to waste any more energy trying to change their minds. Over the next couple of years, I landed a new job at a tech firm with better pay and benefits. The certifications I'd been working on paid off, and I got promoted to a project coordinator position within 6 months. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was actually getting somewhere. But even as I moved forward, the scars from what happened didn't fade. Every time I achieved something, I couldn't help but think about how my family wasn't there to see it. My mom, who had always been my biggest supporter, didn't even know I'd landed a great job or moved into a better apartment. It stung, but I reminded myself that this was the life they'd chosen by believing Eric over me. Speaking of Eric, I didn't hear much about him during those years, but what little I did hear didn't surprise me. Jake occasionally ran into people from our old town who mentioned him, and the stories were always the same. Eric was still job hopping, blaming everyone else for his failures, and mooching off Paul. Apparently, he'd even blown through the last of his college fund on a failed business venture. Classic Eric. By the time 4 years had passed, I was in a solid place. I was a project manager at my tech firm, making more money than I'd ever thought possible. I'd bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood. But life has a funny way of bringing things full circle. Just when I thought I'd finally left my family's mess behind, Eric found a way to drag me back in. Jake got a call one day from an unknown number. He didn't think much of it at first, probably a spam call or something. But when he picked up, it was Eric. Apparently, Eric had been trying to track me down for weeks. He'd gone to my old workplace, reached out to mutual friends, even tried messaging me on LinkedIn. Jake ignored him at first, but then Eric told him why he needed to talk to me. His 2-year-old daughter had a heart condition, and she needed surgery. Eric was desperate, and I was his last hope. When Jake told me, my first reaction was anger. After everything Eric had done, he had the nerve to ask me for help? But then Jake showed me a picture of a little girl hooked up to machines. But I didn't want to get involved. I told Jake to tell Eric to figure it out himself, but Jake wouldn't let it go. "Look, man," he said, "I know Eric's a piece of trash, but this kid's innocent. She didn't ask for any of this. Are you really going to let her suffer because of him?" I hated that Jake was right. That girl didn't deserve to pay for Eric's mistakes. But if Eric thought I was going to swoop in and save the day without making him face the consequences, he didn't know me as well as he thought. So I agreed to meet him, but I did it on my terms. We met at my office, a place where I was in control. I wanted him to see just how far I'd come since he'd tried to destroy me. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. The cocky, entitled stepbrother I remembered was gone. In his place was this wreck of a guy who looked like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and he had dark circles under his eyes. The second I closed the door, he broke down. I'm talking full-on tears, falling to his knees, begging me to help him. He told me he'd tried everything: crowdfunding, selling his car, even going to distant relatives for help. He'd managed to scrape together about $30,000, but he was still $70,000 short. Without the surgery, Mia's condition would keep getting worse, and the doctors weren't sure how much time she had left. "I know I don't deserve your help," he said, choking on his words. "But this isn't about me. It's about Mia. Please, Alex, you're her only hope." I let him talk. I let him plead and cry and tell me his sob story. Then, when he finally ran out of things to say, I told him my terms. If he wanted my help, he had to confess everything to the family. Every lie, every manipulation, every time he'd blamed me for something he'd done. He had to tell the truth about the college fund, how he stole it and framed me, and he had to do it in front of everyone. The color drained from his face. "Alex, please," he said. "I'll do anything else. I'll pay you back. I'll sign a contract. Just don't make me do that." I didn't budge. No confession, no money, I said. Take it or leave it. He tried to bargain. He begged me to reconsider. He even offered to make a public apology on social media instead of facing the family. But I stood firm. I wasn't interested in his shortcuts or half measures. If he wanted me to help his daughter, he was going to have to take responsibility for what he'd done. After what felt like forever, he finally agreed. Okay, he said. I could barely hear him. I'll do it. I made it clear that I wasn't just taking his word for it. You arrange the family meeting, I said. You tell them the truth, and only after you've done that will I transfer the money. Directly to the hospital, not to you. He nodded, looking like he wanted to crawl into a hole and disappear. As he left, he tried to apologize again. I'm sorry, Alex, he said, for everything. I know I can't take it back, but I want you to know I regret it. I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in his apologies. Words didn't mean anything to me. I'd spent 4 years rebuilding my life from nothing because of his lies, and no amount of sorry was going to change that. After he left, I called Jake to let him know what had happened. Jake thought I was crazy for even considering helping Eric. Dude, the guy ruined your life, he said. And now you're going to bail him out? You're a better person than me, that's for sure. It's not about him, I said. It's about that little girl. She doesn't deserve to pay for his mistakes. Even as I said it, I wasn't sure if that was the whole truth. Yeah, I wanted to help the girl, but part of me also wanted to see Eric squirm. I wanted him to stand in front of the family he'd lied to and admit what he'd done. I wanted them to see the truth about the golden boy they'd chosen over me. Eric texted me a few days later to say he'd set up the meeting for the weekend. Everyone's going to be there, he wrote. Mom, Dad, the grandparents, aunts, uncles, all of them. I couldn't deny the knot in my stomach when I read that message. I hadn't seen any of them since the day Paul kicked me out. But this was my chance to finally clear my name, to get the truth out there once and for all. So here where I am right now, everything keeps replaying in my head. The accusations, the lies, the years of being treated like the scapegoat. I don't know how the family's going to react when Eric confesses. And honestly, I don't care. This isn't about their forgiveness. It's about finally getting the truth out there, for me. I'll let you all know how it goes once it's done. Stay tuned. Final update. Hey guys, so just like I promised, here's the update. So, the family meeting was scheduled for Saturday. And let me tell you, the whole week leading up to it was a mental marathon. It wasn't just about making my stepbrother confess. It was about walking into a room full of people who had believed him over me for 4 years. People who didn't even bother questioning his lies. I have no idea how they're going to react. And honestly, I couldn't care less. This isn't about fixing relationships. It's about getting the closure I've been waiting for. When I pulled up to my mom and Paul's house, I almost didn't get out of the car. It had been 4 years since I'd last been there, and everything about the place felt like a bad memory. The driveway where Paul had yelled at me to leave, the front door my mom didn't stop me from walking out of, it all came flooding back. If it wasn't for Jake sitting in the passenger seat, I might have turned around and left. Are you sure about this? Jake asked. He wasn't trying to stop me, just making sure I was ready. Yeah, I said. Let's get it over with. When we walked in, the house looked exactly the same. Except for one thing, all the photos with me in them were gone. That stung more than I expected. It was like they'd erased me completely, like I'd never even been part of the family. Everyone was already there, packed into the living room. My mom, Paul, Eric, his grandparents, aunts, uncles, you name it. My mom's face lit up when she saw me, and she immediately burst into tears. She tried to hug me, but I stepped back. I'm not here for that, I said. Let's just get this over with. Paul looked uncomfortable, like he didn't know how to react. He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off. Don't bother, I said. I'm here to hear Eric tell the truth and leave. That's it. Eric looked like he wanted to disappear. He was sweating, fidgeting, and avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. Twice he glanced at me like he was hoping I'd change my mind and let him off the hook. I didn't say a word. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Eric started talking. He stumbled over his words at first, mumbling something about how he'd made mistakes and let everyone down. Paul tried to jump in and reassure him, but I wasn't having it. No, I said. You tell them the truth. All of it. And he did. Slowly, painfully, Eric laid it all out. He told them how he'd blown the college fund during his gap year, partying, buying junk, and going on trips. He explained how he'd panicked when Paul found out the money was gone and decided to blame me because he knew Paul would believe him. He admitted to faking the emails, planting the USB drive, and lying about seeing me snooping in the office. The room was dead silent by the time he finished. Paul looked like someone had slapped him. His parents, Eric's grandparents, were crying, probably realizing they'd funded all of Eric's screw-ups. My aunts and uncles were staring at Eric like they didn't even know who he was. But I wasn't paying attention to any of them. I was watching my mom. Her face was a mix of shock, guilt, and heartbreak. She kept shaking her head, whispering no under her breath, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I thought I'd feel satisfaction seeing her finally realize the truth, but instead it just felt empty. When Eric was done, I stood up and pulled out my phone. I'd already set up the hospital transfer in advance, so all I had to do was hit send. I showed him the confirmation screen and said, "The money's there. Mia will get her surgery. We're done here." That's when my mom broke down. "Alex, please," she said, grabbing my arm. "I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I failed you. Please don't leave like this." Paul tried to jump in too. "Alex, I don't know what to say. I was wrong. I'll write you a check for double the college fund. Whatever it takes to make this right." Even Eric tried to apologize. He was crying by this point, saying he'd spend the rest of his life trying to make it up to me. "I know I ruined everything," he said, "but thank you for helping Mia. I'll never forget this." I just looked at all of them. My mom, who had chosen to stay silent when I needed her most, Paul, who had thrown me out without a second thought, and Eric, the person who had taken everything from me. 4 years ago, I would have given anything to hear their apologies. Now, they meant nothing. I yanked my arm out of my mom's grip, shot her a cold glare, and walked out without a single word or glance back. Jake followed me, and we drove back to my place in silence. When we got there, he finally broke the tension. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. And for the first time in years, I meant it. Since then, I've gone completely no contact with my family. I blocked their numbers, their emails, and even their social media accounts. My mom has been sending me long, emotional emails every day, talking about how she cries herself to sleep and how much she misses me. Paul has sent multiple checks, first for $80,000, then for $160,000, to make up for the pain and interest. I mailed them back without a second thought. Eric's grandparents have even shown up at my office a few times, but security knows to turn them away. They leave letters saying how sorry they are and how they feel responsible for everything because they'd spoiled Eric and let him get away with too much. I don't care. They believed him when it mattered, and that's all I need to know. I heard through Jake that Mia's surgery was a success. She's recovering well, and I'm genuinely happy for her. She's innocent in all of this, and I hope she grows up to be nothing like her dad. As for Eric, he apparently moved back in with his mom in another state. His ex-wife won't let him see Mia without supervision, and he's been struggling to hold down a job. I'd be lying if I said I felt bad for him. As for me, I'm thriving. I got another promotion at work and just put a down payment on a house in Seattle. My company's opening a new office there, and I'll be heading it up. It feels good to keep moving forward, leaving all the toxicity behind. Sometimes people tell me I should forgive my family, especially my mom. She was in a tough spot, they say. She didn't know what to believe. But sorry doesn't erase 4 years of betrayal. Sorry doesn't give me back the family I lost, the trust that was shattered, or the years I spent rebuilding my life alone. Some bridges just aren't worth rebuilding. They say the best revenge is living well. And let me tell you, I'm doing just fine. Thanks for reading, Alex.
Your system is useless. No way I'm paying for this. Daniel, the sales director of our client company, laughed mockingly as he shouted at me. Tools aren't to blame. No matter how excellent they are, they become useless depending on the user. Well then, the contract is terminated. Of course. I never want to see the face of someone who drifts around without a proper job, uninstall the system along with the data, and disappear. Following Daniel's orders, I began uninstalling the software I had brought in. Will this completely delete everything? Of course. Let me confirm. Are you sure this is what you want? Don't make me repeat myself. Hurry up and delete it. Daniel hurried me as I reconfirmed. Hurry up and do it. Daniel made me press the delete command. This command was crucial enough to change my life, but he never realized it. One click can turn your life around. My name is David Wilson. Up until last month, I worked at a system development company, but my side project reached an unexpectedly high level of completion. I wanted more flexibility and freedom to explore its potential. Driven by various impulses, I decided to go independent. Although there were some anxieties about running my own business at the age of 42, by the time I felt the urge to test my abilities further, I had already taken action. I had no complaints about the company I left. In fact, I considered it an excellent workplace. I will never forget my gratitude towards President Miller. You've been a great help. I struggled with the idea of you leaving, but I can't hold back a man with a burning desire to venture out. President Miller was an admirable person who had founded the company after going independent himself. He would often share stories of the hardships during the company's early days at banquets, while the new employees would listen reluctantly. I loved hearing these heroic tales from President Miller, whose eyes would light up with determination as if he had returned to those days. Looking back, perhaps his influence strongly impacted my decision to go independent. But luck, you are my pride. What I'm about to do could become a competitor to the company. I asked the president if he was okay with supporting me so openly. Don't hesitate, instead, surpass me before I die. With those words, President Miller laughed heartily. Amazingly, President Miller handed me several projects. He called it a bonus with my severance pay, but it was far too generous to be just a bonus. At first, I planned to get contracts on my own by pounding the pavement and working steadily. While it was very appreciated, I couldn't rely on the company I left for everything. However, President Miller insisted that these projects were only possible because of my efforts, and he wouldn't back down. The beginning is crucial. Use this to gain momentum, he said with those determined eyes, making it impossible to refuse his generosity. Perhaps I had ignited a dormant passion within President Miller. Today, I was visiting a client that he had referred to me. The client was mid-sized or larger within the industry, ranking among the top of those I managed in my previous job. President Johnson, a client from my former company, seemed to have introduced me to another company he had connections with. President Johnson contacted President Miller after learning about my resignation. After hearing about my decision to go independent, he considered entrusting this project to me. Feeling the support from so many people naturally boosted my confidence. I've heard about this new system, and it's advanced and very intriguing. However, I want to see firsthand if it's truly reliable. President Taylor, the head of my first client, had a valid point. I was confident in what I had created, but getting it recognized was a different story. My system managed basic functions like customer list management and pickup, and it visualized customer satisfaction. It analyzed recorded voices from calls to determine emotional swings using an algorithm and graphed them. This method was more reliable and less cumbersome than surveys, whose responses might not be truthful. However, gaining trust from companies was challenging because it used AI. Anticipating this, I recorded our conversation today. I apologize for this, and I'm sincerely sorry, I said. President Taylor accepted my explanation, understanding it was necessary. I had the system analyze the sampled voice. Seeing the results, I realized I'd been outsmarted. You were never suspicious from the start, were you? I said. President Taylor laughed heartily. It was a recommendation from President Johnson. Besides, this is impressive. If this line goes up, it means positive, right? I was thrilled by President Taylor's enthusiastic response and explained everything with energy. Of course, I secured the contract. Though I'm on a business trip today, there's a sales director named Daniel. I'll have him handle the detailed checks. Make sure to teach him how to use it properly. At the end of our conversation, President Taylor told me this. I readily agreed, but this would become the worst encounter of my life. I don't get it. Daniel, the sales director, had the same reaction after my third explanation. I thought I had explained it as clearly as possible, but he didn't seem to understand. No, he probably wasn't trying to understand. Sprawled on the couch with his hands resting on the armrest, he showed no sign of enthusiasm. Do we really need something like this? It's such a hassle. I tried to persuade him politely, but the more deferential I was, the more arrogant Daniel became. That's enough. I have to go entertain a client now. I'll contact you if I have more questions. Without giving me a chance to respond, Daniel left. Despite feeling disheartened by his treatment, I was determined to make my first deal a success and encouraged myself. The next morning, I was awakened by a loud ringtone. Daniel's name was displayed on the screen. "You're late. How long are you going to keep me waiting?" The call started with a loud yell echoing in my ears. I apologized, and Daniel snorted in response. "I don't understand how to use this. Get here immediately. Don't take too long." He abruptly ended the call, and I grumbled internally about compliance. But maybe this is just the harsh reality of the outside world. I had no backing or track record at this point. So, I told myself firmly that I had to prove myself with sincerity and skill. "How long did it take you? You weren't having breakfast, were you?" As soon as I arrived at the office, he interrogated me. When I explained I got there as quickly as possible, he scolded me for making excuses. "You're also too slow to answer the phone. I told you I'd call again." "I apologize. I was actually working late into the night on this for you, Daniel." In truth, I had stayed up late creating a manual to demonstrate my abilities to Daniel. It was incredibly detailed, just for him. Oh, even Daniel wouldn't be able to say he didn't understand after seeing this. As he flipped through the manual, he spoke. "Are you mocking me?" I was stunned by his completely unexpected reaction. "Are you trying to brush me off with a piece of paper? Why don't you explain it to me yourself?" He accused me of having no sincerity. My patience was reaching its limit. "I tried explaining, but it seemed difficult for you to understand." I inadvertently blurted out. Daniel's brows furrowed. "Are you insulting me? How dare you speak to a client like that?" "I'm very sorry. I didn't mean it that way." I quickly apologized, coming to my senses. Daniel demanded that I show sincerity if I was going to apologize. "Listen, I have a business meeting today. If you want to show sincerity, you need to take responsibility for sending the data to the president." "Wait a minute, that's too much. You're not saying it's impossible, right? You're going to show sincerity, aren't you? This situation is because your system is hard to use. Isn't this your responsibility?" The humiliation burned deeply. My prized creation was ridiculed, and I was forced to take on unrelated tasks. But losing my temper here would betray the expectations of those who supported me. I clenched my fists and endured. "Understood. I'll send all the data to the president." Daniel left, speaking forcefully about not making any mistakes. "Hey, what's going on here? Explain." As soon as we met, Daniel started yelling. He had called me again early in the morning, demanding an explanation. Given the previous incident, I couldn't just tell him to refer to the manual, so I had come in person. "What do you mean by what's going on?" The manual I had given him was carelessly placed on his desk. Seeing the bent pages, it was clear he had hastily tried to study it. "Why is my graph so low?" I quickly understood why Daniel was furious as I looked at his computer. As I explained before, the AI reads emotions from voices and graphs them. "I know that. I'm asking why my graph is low." "I'm very sorry to say this, but your customers had negative reactions to your interactions." In reality, it was much harsher than that. The reactions to Daniel were almost all less than half of the average. I wanted to ask what kind of interactions could make the graph drop this low. "Ridiculous. What can this machine know? Is it broken?" He started making absurd complaints, but everything was functioning correctly. Looking at the data of other employees, everyone but Daniel was far above average. "You're a con artist for selling such a fraudulent product to the company. I suspected you from the start, especially when I heard you were a freelancer." Daniel continued his tirade. "A man your age without a steady job, just drifting around, you must have been unwanted and without a place in any company." The moment I heard that insult, something snapped inside me. Not saying anything back after all this felt disrespectful to the people who genuinely supported me. "That's enough," I replied with a firm tone. I had reached my limit, and I didn't want to deal with this man anymore. Seeing my reaction, Daniel seemed eager to seize the moment and opened his mouth wide. "Ha, the defects in your system have been exposed. and now your true colors are showing. Your junk system, made by a scammer, is worthless. I'm not paying a cent." He continued to rant. I looked at Daniel silently, my gaze filled with anger. "Oh, struck a nerve, did I? Let me say it again then. Your system is useless. No way I'm paying for this." "Well then, the contract is terminated. There's no reason to continue a contract when they refuse to pay." I wasn't sure if Daniel even had the authority to say such things, but there was no need to endure this any longer. Daniel neither tried to understand how to use the system nor realized his mistake. Without realizing the consequences would come back to him. Of course, I never want to see the face of someone who drifts around without a job, uninstall the system and disappear. Following Daniel's orders, I began uninstall the software I had brought in. This will really delete everything, right? Of course, just to confirm once more, are you sure you want to delete it? Don't make me repeat myself. Hurry up and delete it. Daniel rushed me as I reconfirmed. I wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible too. Hurry up and do it. Daniel made me execute the command to delete the data, and all the data was deleted. Good. Now that it's gone, I have no more use for you. Get lost. He waved his hand dismissively. He was endlessly rude, but he was probably relieved inside. I knew why Daniel was in such a hurry. President Taylor was on a short business trip and was scheduled to return today. He probably wanted to delete everything before any incriminating data could be seen. While he succeeded in destroying evidence, my presence made him nervous. He was desperate to get rid of me. It was truly pathetic. I realized how fortunate I had been to be surrounded by good people in a supportive environment. What are you standing around for? Never come near this company again. Just as Daniel shouted that. What's going on here? It's awfully noisy. President Taylor appeared with a stern expression. Seeing the carry-on in his hand, he must have come directly back to the office. Daniel, who had been so aggressive a moment ago, quickly straightened up. President Taylor, it's a pleasure to see you. President, you're back early. How was the trip? It seemed Taylor had returned much sooner than expected. Realizing that Taylor might have heard his shouting, Daniel desperately tried to change the subject. However, President Taylor was not someone who could be easily deceived. He looked at Daniel with a puzzled expression and asked again. I asked what's going on. Why is David Wilson here? And what was that shouting about? Well, you see, ahem. Daniel coughed theatrically, blinking and wiping the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. I found a defect in his system. A defect. President Taylor's eyebrows twitched. Yes, an undeniable defect. Without explaining what the defect was, Daniel pushed the conversation forward forcefully. I became suspicious and had him delete the system and data. He's a scammer trying to sell defective products, President. I see. President Taylor said, appearing to ponder Daniel's words. And what does that mean exactly? Slowly crossing his arms, he mentioned a name. You're saying that President Johnson introduced a scammer to our company, right? What? Daniel's voice cracked at the mention of that name. Naturally, Daniel had no idea that I came here through President Johnson's introduction or about my relationship with him. Why is President Johnson's name involved? Daniel's eyes darted around in confusion. Why, because President Johnson personally recommended David Wilson as highly competent. Isn't that right, David? President Taylor looked at me. Daniel was speechless with shock. He never imagined I had a connection with such an important client. Yes, President Johnson has been very supportive since I was with my previous company. Just recently, he even treated me to dinner to celebrate my independence. That's how it is, Daniel. So, are you seriously claiming that President Johnson, a valued partner of ours, sent a scammer to our company? President Taylor's eyes bore into Daniel. A stifled sound came from Daniel's throat. Even though he didn't know, he not only questioned the introduction from a client, but also treated me extremely disrespectfully. If President Johnson heard about this from me, it wouldn't end well. I had no intention of bringing up such an unpleasant topic with President Johnson, but Daniel must have been feeling uneasy. No, President. But Daniel wasn't one to back down easily. He had to be incredibly thick-skinned to treat others the way he did. You're both being fooled by him. This guy is selling a dubious product with AI that has no credibility. He desperately tried to push his flimsy excuse. Daniel refused to retreat. However, baseless emotional arguments wouldn't work on President Taylor. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank into the quagmire. He didn't seem to grasp the situation he was in at all. Is that so? I was quite impressed with it. President Taylor, with his hand on his chin, squinted thoughtfully. In contrast to the agitated Daniel, he remained calm. He brushed off Daniel's heated accusations as if they were a gentle breeze. No, that stuff is all fake. I personally ensured that such bogus records were deleted. I thought it was well made, President Taylor said as he took a laptop out of his carry-on case. What are you doing, sir? Daniel questioned, but President Taylor ignored him, placing the laptop on the desk and waking it from sleep mode. Well, I couldn't understand these so-called flaws you mentioned, he said. The screen displayed a list of employee names. He seemed to have already familiarized himself with the operation. With a few clicks, the familiar graphs appeared. Look here. This is the data since David's system was implemented. Jones in sales is cheerful and lively, so these are joy indicators. Williams gives a calm impression, which seems to reflect high customer assurance scores. As he praised the employee's performance, he explained the graphs in detail, clearly enjoying himself. From his explanations, it was evident that the characteristics matched the graphs perfectly. I could confidently say the system was reliable. But Daniel didn't seem to be paying attention. He was trembling and his eyes were wide open in shock. Why is the data still here? Daniel's plan fell apart, and he questioned in a hoarse voice. I knew this would happen from the moment he ordered me to delete the data. That's why I complied with his order. Didn't you delete everything? Daniel angrily confronted me, almost grabbing me. I replied calmly. Yes, of course, I deleted all the company data. As per Daniel's instructions, I had indeed deleted both the system and the remaining data. He had seen that moment himself, and while there were recovery options, they couldn't be executed in mere minutes. You're lying. The data is still here. You really are a scammer. Daniel, filled with anger and confusion, pointed aggressively at the screen. I'm not lying. I deleted the data as per your instructions. But there was something Daniel didn't know. However, the president liked it so much that he asked for a personal copy. What? That short exclamation was enough to convey Daniel's agitation. Yes, President Taylor had been so impressed that he made an additional personal contract separate from the company one. Naturally, the data was transferred not only to the company, but also to President Taylor personally. It was as if President Taylor was waiting for me to reveal this fact when he spoke up. Why are you so flustered, Daniel? Is there something inconvenient about the data being retained? No, of course not. As soon as Daniel denied it, President Taylor clapped his hands. Oh, right. Now I remember, your graph had quite low numbers. President Taylor said, pretending to recall, and moved the cursor to select Daniel from the list. The graph displayed was the complete opposite of the high-performing employees. A disappointing graph was exposed in front of us. Well, that is. Daniel stammered, and President Taylor pressed further. You don't mean to say that you tried to hide this by making David delete the data, do you? These words hit the mark. President Taylor's words gradually cornered Daniel, pushing him to the edge. You're misunderstanding, President. Daniel flailed his arms dramatically, as if drowning in the ocean. He continued his futile resistance, refusing to give up. He tried to frame me. He tampered with the graphs. For the umpteenth time, Daniel made a desperate claim. President Taylor sighed deeply and asked with a hint of exasperation, "What benefit would David gain from doing that?" Daniel hesitated, then pointed at me and shouted loudly, "He hated me from the beginning. His attitude was bad, and his responses were sloppy." That was far from the truth. I had explained everything thoroughly and even made a dedicated manual. Regardless of personal feelings, I had handled everything meticulously. "President, are you going to trust this machine over someone who has worked with you for years? In the end, you should trust a person's voice, not graphs or data. Listen to my voice, just as it is." Daniel looked at President Taylor as if he had just given a grand speech. "You're right. In the end, what you can truly trust are a person's voice and feelings. That's why," President Taylor said as he reached for the laptop and clicked the play button. "That's disappointing." The next moment, a scratchy recording began to play. "Are you trying to brush me off with a piece of paper? Why don't you explain it to me yourself? Are you insulting me? How dare you speak to a client like that?" The recording captured Daniel's various outbursts towards me. He was speechless, but the audio continued. With Daniel's angry shouts and sarcastic remarks in the background, President Taylor spoke. "This is the real voice you mentioned, Daniel. Even without the system, it's clear. You're very angry, selfish, rude, and arrogant. How could?" Daniel's voice trembled as he struggled to speak. I addressed him clearly and calmly, so the message would sink into his bewildered mind. "You said it yourself. You must have heard it on the recording just now. As per your instructions, I sent the data to the president with sincerity and responsibility." I took a breath and added, "You asked for all the data to be sent, including the audio recordings I had at the time." I pulled out the voice recorder from my pocket. President Miller had given it to me as a bonus, saying it would be useful if I ever went independent. I never thought it would come in handy like this. It was given to me by someone concerned about my lack of support. I hoped I'd never have to use it, but thanks to you, that hope didn't come true. No. It seemed the voice recorder had a significant impact. Daniel finally seemed to give up, hanging his head in defeat. There was no way for him to reverse the situation now. Accepting his loss, Daniel closed his mouth and remained motionless. President Taylor approached me. "On behalf of my company, I deeply apologize for the trouble caused." He spoke clearly and apologized deeply. "Please, President Taylor, raise your head. I am grateful to you for believing in me." President Taylor finally raised his head and turned his gaze to the bewildered Daniel. "I had intended to trust you. When I returned, I planned to talk with you. Have you apologized to David and work on improving your approach to customer interactions based on the graph data?" President Taylor genuinely believed in Daniel. Even with his mistreatment of me and poor customer service, he thought Daniel could admit his mistakes and change. But you betrayed that trust. Instead of facing your mistakes, you tried to cover them up and went as far as to call David a scammer. It's inexcusable. By deleting the data, Daniel had destroyed any hope he had left. This system is meant to visualize customer satisfaction and help you identify areas for improvement. Thinking that a low graph means just a bad evaluation is incredibly short-sighted. Short-sighted? Daniel reacted slightly, perhaps troubled by my words. "Yes, you were so focused on immediate judgment that you rushed to delete the data, and in doing so, you missed your last chance. If that's not short-sighted, what is? The effort to improve is what truly matters, but you ran away from the problems you needed to face."
Growing up in a middle-class family in suburban Chicago, my life was pretty straightforward. My dad, Tom, spent 30 years on the police force before retiring, and my mom, Sarah, still works as a secretary at Lincoln Elementary. They gave me everything they could, but we were never wealthy. I'm Tasha Mitchell. Well, I was before I became Tasha Reynolds. After graduating from college with an accounting degree, I landed a job at Anderson & Partners, a mid-sized accounting firm. The pay was decent, the work was steady, and I thought that would be my life. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. Then came that rainy Tuesday in October when I literally bumped into Marcus outside Starbucks. I was rushing to get my morning coffee before work, and he was heading to some important meeting. My coffee spilled all over his obviously expensive suit, and I wanted to die right there. "I'm so sorry," I started dabbing at his jacket with napkins. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning, I swear." Instead of getting angry, he laughed. "Don't worry about it. Though you could make it up to me by having dinner with me tonight." That dinner turned into another, and another. Marcus was different from anyone I'd dated before. He was the son of James and Victoria Reynolds, owners of Reynolds Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the Midwest. But he never made me feel less than him. He loved that I came from a real family, as he called it. That all changed when he took me to meet his parents at their mansion in Lake Forest. I'll never forget Victoria Reynolds looking me up and down like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "So, Tasha," she said, swirling her wine glass, "Marcus tells us you're an accountant?" "Yes, I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "How practical," she said with a thin smile. "And your parents?" When I told her about my dad being a retired cop and my mom a school secretary, you'd think I'd said they were professional criminals. James Reynolds barely looked at me during dinner, speaking only to Marcus about work. When he proposed 3 months later, I said yes without hesitation. His parents attended our wedding with frozen smiles and stiff congratulations. I thought I could win them over with time. I thought love would be enough. After our honeymoon in Bali, Marcus and I moved into his luxury apartment in downtown Chicago. The place was bigger than my parents' entire house, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. I felt like I was living in a dream. 2 months after we married, I discovered I was pregnant. Marcus was ecstatic, spinning me around our massive living room when I told him. Even Victoria and James seemed to soften a little at the news, though Victoria couldn't resist saying, "Well, at least the child will have good breeding on one side." Our son, James Jr., Marcus insisted on naming him after his father, was born on a snowy December morning. The moment I held him, nothing else mattered, not Victoria's constant criticisms, not the whispers at Reynolds Industries parties about the accountant who married the boss's son. JJ, as we called him, was perfect. Those first 2 years were actually good. Marcus took to fatherhood like a natural, coming home early to play with JJ, reading him bedtime stories, taking us both to the park on weekends. He was thriving as financial director at Reynolds Industries, and I worked part-time from home as an accountant while taking care of JJ and our home. Victoria and James might not have liked me, but they doted on their grandson, showering him with expensive gifts and demanding regular visits. But somewhere around JJ's 3rd birthday, things started to change. Marcus began coming home later and later, always with the same excuse, "Big project at work, honey." You wouldn't understand. The man who used to rush home to see his son now barely made it for bedtime. Then came that Thursday when Victoria showed up unannounced at our apartment, her Hermes scarf perfectly arranged, despite the wind outside. "Would you care to explain," she said, walking in without waiting for an invitation, "why you weren't at the company's annual gala last night?" I stared at her, confused. "What gala?" "Don't play dumb, Tasha. The Reynolds Industries anniversary gala. Every executive and their wife was there, except you." My stomach dropped. I didn't know about any gala. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Marcus said you weren't feeling well." "Are you telling me my son lied?" I waited up that night, sitting in our dark living room until Marcus came home at 11:30. He loosened his tie as he walked in, stopping short when he saw me. "Why didn't you tell me about the gala?" I asked quietly. He sighed, pouring himself a scotch. "Look, Tasha, let's be honest. You wouldn't have fit in. You're too simple for these events. The other executives' wives, they know how to carry themselves. They can discuss art and wine and summer homes in the Hamptons. What would you talk about? Your dad's police stories? Your mom's adventures in the school cafeteria?" I felt like he'd slapped me. I'm your wife, Marcus. You're supposed to be proud of me, not ashamed. I was proud, Tasha. When we were dating, your simplicity was charming. But I'm the financial director now. I need a wife who can be more. I went to bed crying that night, telling myself he was just stressed from work, that things would get better. But deep down, I knew something had broken between us, something I wasn't sure could be fixed. It was a Tuesday when my world fell apart. Marcus had texted that he was working late again, and I was doing my usual cleaning routine around the apartment. When I got to his home office, I noticed his laptop was open on his desk, screen still bright. I'd never snooped before, I trusted him, despite everything. But something made me pause this time. Maybe it was the way the screen showed his email was open, or maybe I was just tired of all the lies. I sat down at his desk, and that's when I saw it, an email thread with someone named Sophia Loran. My hand shook as I started reading. There were hundreds of messages between them, going back months. Sophia was apparently a new marketing executive at Reynolds Industries, hired about a year ago. As I scrolled through their correspondence, my stomach turned. Had dinner with the village idiot again, Marcus had written. God, I can't believe I have to go home to her. Sophia's response, poor baby. Don't worry, I'll make it all better tomorrow. They talked about me like I was a joke, the simple-minded wife who didn't know her husband was sleeping with someone else. There were pictures of jewelry he'd bought her, weekend trips they'd taken while he'd told me he was at business conferences. I stayed up all night, copying everything to a USB drive, printing key emails, taking screenshots. When Marcus finally came home at 7 a.m., his shirt wrinkled and his tie loose, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the evidence spread out in front of me. Care to explain? I asked, holding up one of the printed emails. How could you do this to me, to our family? He laughed, actually laughed. Come on, Tasha. Did you really think you were enough? Sophia is everything you're not, sophisticated, sexy, exciting. When's the last time you even tried to look good for me? I've been taking care of our son while you've been screwing around. Look, he said, pouring himself a coffee like we were discussing the weather, here's how this is going to work. You'll stay my wife, on paper. It's better for my image at the company. Sophia understands. And hey, he added with a nasty grin, maybe I'll even find time for you occasionally. If you're lucky. I ran to JJ's room, my hands shaking as I threw some clothes into a backpack. JJ was still sleeping, clutching his favorite teddy bear. I gently woke him up. Baby, we're going to visit Grandma and Grandpa for a while, okay? Marcus leaned against the doorframe, watching us. You'll be back. Where else could you possibly go? I picked up my son, grabbed the backpack and my purse with the USB drive, and walked past Marcus without a word. Through tears, I drove to my parents' house. Mom opened the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. The divorce papers arrived 3 days after I left. Victoria Reynolds personally delivered them to my parents' front door, wearing a satisfied smirk. I always knew you weren't good enough for my son, she said, handing me the envelope. I'm just glad he finally realized it too. But what came next was worse than anything I'd imagined. Marcus wasn't just filing for divorce, he was suing for full custody of JJ. His lawyer filed papers claiming I was an unfit mother, painting a picture of me that was completely false. Your Honor, Marcus's expensive lawyer said during our first hearing, Mrs. Reynolds has exhibited increasingly erratic behavior over the past year. She drinks heavily, creates scenes of jealousy without cause, and has become unstable. Thank God I'd saved all that evidence. When my lawyer presented the email correspondence between Marcus and Sophia, showing his infidelity and his cruel comments about me, the judge's expression changed. The timestamps on the emails proved I hadn't been creating scenes. I hadn't even known about the affair until I found those messages. So, Mr. Reynolds, the judge said, reviewing the evidence, you claim your wife is unstable, yet these emails show you were the one deceiving her, gaslighting her? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit. The judge awarded me primary custody of JJ, with Marcus getting every other weekend and substantial child support payments. I went back to work full-time at my accounting firm, while Mom and Dad helped with JJ. They were amazing, turning their retirement years into full-time grandparent duty without a single complaint. We settled into a routine. It wasn't luxury living anymore, but it was honest and peaceful. Then came that Saturday morning when a black Range Rover pulled up in front of my parents' modest house. Marcus stepped out, and with him was Sophia, tall, blonde, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "I'm here to see my son," Marcus announced, pushing past me into the house. Sophia followed, her nose wrinkled as she looked around our living room with its worn but comfortable furniture. "Oh my God," she laughed, picking up one of Mom's cherished family photos. "This place is literally a dump. Like an actual kennel." "Watch your mouth," I warned her. She turned to Marcus. "Baby, you can't let your son stay in this hovel. And these old people?" She gestured toward my parents, who stood shocked in the doorway. "They belong in a ditch somewhere, not raising a Reynolds heir." "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "Both of you, get out of my parents' house right now." "Or what?" Marcus sneered. "You know what, Tasha? I'm done playing nice. I'm going to take JJ, and I'm going to destroy you. You think you won in court? Just wait." I shoved them both toward the door. "Get out." "Come on, baby," Sophia purred to Marcus. "This place probably has fleas anyway." As they drove away, I hugged my parents tight. Mom was crying, and Dad looked like he wanted to punch something. But watching that Range Rover disappear down our street, I realized something. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was angry. The next night, Dad found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of coffee. "You know, sweetheart," he said, sitting down across from me, "sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Remember Mike Sullivan? He worked with me on the force. Now he's a private investigator. Real thorough guy, knows how to dig deep without leaving traces." I thought about Sophia's smug face, about her cruel words about my parents, about all the nasty emails she kept sending me. Just that morning, she'd commented on my LinkedIn profile photo, "Look at this pathetic wannabe. Can't even afford decent clothes anymore?" Marcus wasn't any better. His latest email had read, "Every time I pick up JJ and see you in that dump, I remember why I upgraded. Enjoy playing poor with your cop daddy." "How much does Mike charge?" I asked Dad. 2 days later, I was sitting in a small office downtown with Mike Sullivan, a gruff man with kind eyes who'd known me since I was a kid. Weeks passed. I focused on work and JJ, trying to ignore the constant stream of harassment from Marcus and Sophia. Then Mike called. "You need to come to my office," he said. "You're going to want to see this in person." The file he handed me was thick. "First off," he said, "Sophia Loren isn't her real name. She's using her sister's identity. Her real name is Carla Larson." As I read through the file, my hands started shaking. Before working at Reynolds Industries, Sophia had been an escort, moving from rich man to rich man, living off their money until they got tired of her or discovered her small-time scams. She'd had different names in different cities, always disappearing just before things got too hot. But what she was doing at Reynolds Industries was far worse. "Look at these bank transfers," Mike pointed out. "She's been siphoning money from company accounts, small amounts that wouldn't raise red flags. And these emails?" He showed me screenshots. "She's been selling company information to your in-laws' biggest competitors. Product launches, merger plans, everything." I sat back, my mind racing. The perfect, sophisticated Sophia Loren was nothing but a con artist. And she'd gotten her hooks into not just my husband, but the entire Reynolds empire. "There's one more thing," Mike said, pulling out another folder. "Remember that big deal Reynolds Industries lost last month? The one that cost them millions? Sophia sold the bid information to their competitor 3 days before the deadline." I gathered all the evidence carefully, making multiple copies. But I didn't make a move. Not yet. Because now I knew something Sophia didn't. Timing is everything. The call from Victoria came on a Wednesday morning. Her voice was as cold as ever. "Tasha, James's 60th birthday party is this Saturday," she said, like she was scheduling a root canal. "While we prefer to keep this a family-only affair, JJ should be there for his grandfather's birthday. And since he's too young to come alone." She let the sentence hang there. "Just remember, you're only being invited as JJ's escort. Try to stay in the background and not embarrass anyone. The party starts at 7. James Reynolds' 60th birthday party was exactly as ostentatious as you'd expect. The mansion was decked out in gold and crystal, with waiters carrying champagne on silver trays. I felt every judgmental stare as JJ and I walked in. "Oh, you came," Victoria said, her smile tight. "Well, JJ darling, come give grandmother a kiss." I stood awkwardly by the appetizer table, watching my son being paraded around like a show pony. The other guests either ignored me or whispered behind their hands. I clutched my large purse containing Mike's file, waiting. Then Marcus walked in with Sophia on his arm. She was wearing a red Valentino dress that probably cost more than my car, diamonds dripping from her ears. "Everyone," Marcus announced, clinking his glass. "I have an announcement to make." He pulled Sophia closer. "I'd like you all to meet my future wife, Sophia Loren. She'll be joining the Reynolds family officially next spring." Victoria rushed forward to embrace her. Finally. A woman worthy of the Reynolds name. Harvard-educated, from a wonderful family. "Unlike some people," James added, shooting me a look. Sophia preened under their attention. "I just feel so blessed to be joining such an esteemed family. And I promise to be the kind of wife Marcus truly deserves." That was my cue. I stood up, my hand steady as I pulled out the file. "Speaking of what people deserve," I said loudly, "I have a few things to share about the future Mrs. Reynolds." "Tasha," Marcus warned, "don't make a scene." I pulled out the first document. "Tell me, Sophia, or should I say Carla Larson? How's your sister feeling about you stealing her identity?" The color drained from Sophia's face. "What is she talking about?" Victoria demanded. "Oh, did she not mention that she's been living under her sister's identity? The real Sophia Loren is a schoolteacher in Minnesota. This woman," I pointed at her, "is Carla Larson, former escort and con artist." "She's lying," Sophia shrieked, but I was already laying out the evidence, photos, bank statements, police reports. "And here's my personal favorite," I continued, pulling out more documents. "Bank transfers showing how she's been stealing from Reynolds Industries. And look at these emails, she's been selling your company's secrets to Wagner Manufacturing and Collins Corp. For months." James Reynolds snatched the papers from my hands. "The Wagner deal, the Collins merger, it was you?" "I can explain," Sophia stammered, backing away from Marcus's thunderous face. "The real Carla Larson," I said, enjoying every moment, "has quite a history. 7 different cities, 7 different wealthy men, 7 different scams. Looks like Reynolds Industries was going to be number 8. The room had gone deadly quiet. I watched their faces change as they read through the evidence, Marcus's confusion, Victoria's horror, James's growing rage. And Sophia, her perfect mask cracking as her house of cards came tumbling down. The elegant birthday party dissolved into chaos within minutes. James Reynolds's face had turned an alarming shade of purple as he read through the evidence. "Get out," he roared at Sophia, who was still trying to stammer excuses. "Get out of my house before I have you arrested right here." "James, darling," she attempted, reaching for his arm. "These are all lies, I can explain everything." "Explain?" He shook the documents at her. "Explain how you cost us the Wagner deal? That contract was worth $20 million. And Collins? They were our biggest competitor, and you've been feeding them everything." Victoria, who'd been quietly reading through the escort service records, looked up with pure venom in her eyes. You common prostitute, she hissed. You thought you could con your way into our family? Sophia backed toward the door, her designer heels clicking on the marble floor. Marcus, baby, tell them. But Marcus looked like he might be sick, staring at the photos of Sophia, or Sophie, with various wealthy men over the years. If you're not off my property in 30 seconds, James said, his voice deadly quiet, I'm calling the police. And trust me, you'll be seeing plenty of our lawyers either way. After Sophia fled, James turned to his son. The party guests were pretending to be absorbed in their champagne, but everyone was watching. You brought this woman into our company, James said. Gave her access to confidential information. All because what? She was pretty? Had nice legs? Dad, I didn't know. Exactly, James roared. You didn't know. Didn't check. Just thought with your, he glanced at JJ and modified his language, with everything except your brain. You're fired, Marcus. Clear out your office by tomorrow. But Dad. And that apartment you're living in? Company property. Find somewhere else to live. Victoria, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly turned to me. Tasha, she said, and for the first time ever, her voice held genuine emotion. We owe you an apology. A significant one. You saved our company from God knows how much damage. James nodded solemnly. We were wrong about you. Very wrong. You've proven yourself more worthy of the Reynolds name than, he glanced at Marcus, others. 3 days later, Sophia was arrested at O'Hare, trying to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. The evidence I'd gathered, combined with what Reynolds Industries lawyers found once they started looking, was overwhelming. She was facing serious fraud charges and massive fines. Marcus, I heard, was staying at a friend's condo while he looked for a new job. No other financial firms were eager to hire a man who'd been fired for such catastrophic negligence. It's been 6 months since James Reynolds' birthday party changed everything. I'm sitting in my new apartment, not as luxurious as the one I shared with Marcus, but perfect for JJ and me. The Reynolds family gave it to me as a token of appreciation for saving their company from Sophia's schemes. The least we could do, James had said, handing me the keys. After everything, well, you understand. The apartment is in a nice neighborhood, close to good schools. JJ's room is decorated with superhero posters, and my little home office overlooks a park. It's not a penthouse with lake views, but it feels like home in a way the luxury apartment never did. Marcus moved to California last month. He calls JJ every Sunday at 7 p.m., like clockwork. Their conversations are short. JJ's still too young to talk long on the phone, but at least he's trying to be a father, even from a distance. He never asks to speak to me, and that's fine. Some bridges stay burned. The biggest change has been with the Reynolds family. Victoria stops by at least once a week, usually bearing gifts for JJ and, surprisingly, for me too. Last week, she brought a beautiful orchid for my windowsill. The real shock came when Victoria and James invited my parents over for dinner. I was nervous. The last time they'd all been in the same room was at my wedding, where the class divide had been palpable. But something had shifted. I watched in amazement as James asked Dad about his years on the force, genuinely interested in his stories. Victoria and Mom talked about gardening, exchanging tips about growing roses. Sarah, Victoria said to my mom at the end of the evening, you and Tom raised an remarkable daughter. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner. We always knew what Tasha was capable of, Mom replied with quiet dignity. Sometimes it just takes others a while to catch up. Life isn't perfect. I still have days when I miss the man I thought Marcus was, when I worry about JJ growing up with a long-distance father. But then I look at my son, happy and healthy, playing with his grandparents, all his grandparents, and I know we're going to be okay. Last night, I found JJ looking at an old photo of Marcus and me from our wedding day. Do you miss Daddy? He asked. I sat down next to him, pulling him close. Sometimes, I said honestly. But you know what? Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes it goes wrong before it goes right. The important thing is to stay true to who you are. Later, as I tucked him into bed, I thought about how far we'd come. From the simple accountant the Reynolds family once scorned, to the woman who saved their company. Sometimes the happy ending isn't the one you expected. Sometimes it's better.